Hey everybody, welcome to our broadcast for today. Joining me are some really great guys, Lionel and Nate and Dustin. Welcome guys, good to see you here.
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Happy
Also,
Monday.
yes, happy Monday, happy final session of this month. It's kind of a bummer always. It's always bittersweet when we're done with these things, but I just kind of glossed over Nate. I was like, hey, Nate, as if it was just like a regular thing, but Nate is an extra special guest. This is like one of those like on Different Strokes, one of those like extra special episodes. Nate is Lord, King, and Master. I think that's the official title, right, of the Trapcode Suite.
Dark Lord.
And Dark Lord of the Trapcode Suite. And he's going to be talking to us a little bit about some of the changes that have come into Trapcode Particular, and we'll be talking about that in just a second. And then I'm going to go into some Trapcode business as well. But just first off, everyone can see my screen, right? I'm sharing things.
Yeah.
Do a little housekeeping in the beginning. If you go to maxon.net, our website, and then go to the news page and go to events, you can see all the events coming up, all of the awesome shows that we're doing. The thing that's happening right now is this here. We got Maxon Color on Thursday, VFX and Chill on Friday, and next Monday we're going to be talking about some Pyro stuff, and so we'll talk about that at the end of this session. We'll get you fired up for next week. Actually, I love all fired up. That's very, very cool. And then also we do record all of our sessions. So we'll be recording this session. If you missed something, you can go to the Maxon Training Team YouTube here and watch it. This session will be available in a day or so, and it will be on the YouTube channel, and they will have links to all the different time stamps for the different components and topics of today. Thank you, Dr. Sassy, for doing that all the time. We really appreciate that. And then also there's a link to a PDF in the documents that come with this session. And in that PDF, there's a special link to a store and then also a code to get in that store. So it's like a two security thing. So there's a special link and a special code to get a free t-shirt. And all you have to do is pay for shipping if you want to do that, which is awesome. And I think that's all of the business, all of the housekeeping. Did I miss something? I don't think I missed anything. And then Nate, can I hand it over to you for presenting things?
Yeah, sure thing.
Or can you request it? Because I don't know
Let me
which
see.
of the Nates is the true Nate.
Oh, yeah. Which one is really me?
I guess it's the one without the mic.
I think I got it.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Is it showing? No.
I'm not seeing your screen yet.
Yes, we can see it.
Can you see now?
Oh,
okay.
There you go.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
Hey, we see Trapcode. We see the particular designer here, yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
All right, awesome, thank you. So, yeah, we just came out with a release for Trapcode and specifically Particular earlier this month. And right now during this development cycle, we're really putting an emphasis on quality of life for Particular. We've spent a couple of years packing a bunch of new features into it, and we're now taking a little bit of a step back from that and getting back to refining it and making it the fun, easy to use experience that folks expect. So the first thing I want to show is actually was a result of a conversation that Chad and I here had in regards to the new form behaviors that we introduced fairly recently. Chad, you were saying that like the entry point into using the form behaviors was still a little bit cumbersome in order to get to that typical starting place that you normally get with Trapcode Forum. Took about 5 or 6 steps in particular. So just brainstorming ways that we could improve that experience, and it occurred to me we already have the ability to create these block presets. So there's just one small thing that we added in for this release is just a handful of these block presets for classic form, dynamic form, box and sphere. And I wasn't trying to be cute with the name there, like C form and D form, like be hip like the kids. That was just a limitation of the amount of space that we have to fit preset titles in. So that was the reasoning behind that. And then, so we for this release, it's just those 4 basic presets, but always, keep in mind you can, if you have a starting place that you find yourself using more often, you can always create your own block presets. My preset. So if you find that there's something that you use more commonly, you can save that into your own custom presets there. So yeah, there's that. And then the big thing that we introduced in this last release was an update to some of our custom UI for the curves, like the overlife or over axis curves and the color gradient. And before I show that, I just want to show a little reminder. If you're veteran particular users, this will look familiar to you. And this is, of course, the overlife curve, and it's a bit dated. It's a bit clunky. When you're using the pencil tool, you got all of these like jagged artifacts. It wasn't the smoothest experience. And then the color gradient, and this was the color gradient again, it was just a little bit dated. Some of the interactivity wasn't quite there. And you only had the single interpolation option. So without further ado, let's take a look at what we have introduced in Trapcode 2023.1. So we're going to look at the color gradient first. So if I set this, I'm going to do radially for this, and immediately you can already see this is just a much sleeker look, much more updated. These color stops are a little bigger, they're easier to grab. The interactivity is much more pleasing. And then this is actually kind of my favorite thing, was we built in this like little excuse me behavior as you're sliding one of the stops past the other one. It's like, oh, pardon me, and bumps out of the way. So there's that. And then you'll notice as soon as you do select one of these color stops, you get these controls down here. So you have your location values, so you can dial this in exactly as you want. Maybe I want that at 30%. Oops. I said, what did I do? 30. There we go. So we have that, and then we also have this midpoint control. So this allows you to control that kind of the bias of the gradient between one stop and another, and then of course you have the actual position control there. And then moving across over here, this is perhaps one of the most requested features that we've had for the color gradient, and this is maybe the most exciting thing. We now have stepped interpolation. So previously in the old design, you see here, you could get that same effect by doubling up your stops, but it was cumbersome and it wasn't a perfect process. So now you can just select your stop and select between stepped or interpolated gradient. And then of course, up here in the menu, you can either step all or interpolate all. So super handy. It's already just in my own playing around, I have really begun to love having that feature available. Sometimes, especially when you're emitting particles, you just want to emit 3 colors and you don't want that interpolated gradient in between. So super, super handy. And then up here, you'll see we still have the your flip back and forth functionality. We still have the color randomization here. Boy, that is not a pleasing color palette. There we go. I like that better. So another thing up here in our hamburger menu that I really like is this distribute. So you see I've moved things around, I've deleted stops, and I know that I just want everything to be perfectly equally distributed. So that is built directly into the menu here. And then of course we still have the copy and paste. If you want to copy your color palette from one particle system to the other, we have that functionality up in here and resetting to default. So
I have a question.
Sure.
So does that copy in the hamburger menu copy the selected color stop, or does it always select the entire gradient and copy the entire gradient?
It copies the entire gradient. So of course, to copy the stop, you would want to go in and get your hex value from the color picker and then copy it that way. But yeah, so within the menu, what's that?
That's much better functionality, I think, to copy the whole gradient all the time. I prefer that.
Right.
So it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And then of course, when you're working in the designer, you can copy the entire color block just by right-clicking on the block and say copy block values, and then paste that over to a subsequent system. Yeah, so the last thing here that I've saved is the presets. So again, well, I don't have it shown here, but you remember in the old design here, you had this drop-down menu, and it gave you what I think like 6 or 7 options, and those were hard-coded into Particular. So we were never able to update them, and there was no ability to save or load custom presets. So guess what? We fixed that. We brought in our browser technology that you will look familiar for, like browsing models and sprites and whatnot. So yeah, we have tons of presets that can be applied. These will look familiar if you've seen them in the block presets, which that would apply to the entire color block, and will affect your whether you have random from gradient or overlife selected. This will only overwrite the color gradient itself. So that's really handy to have there. And then of course, we went through and created all of the stepped options as well. So those are ready to use out of the box. But then, if you have your own custom settings you want to make, you can now save your gradient, and then it'll automatically put it in this gradient file. It'll name it my gradient 1, 2, 3, 4 if you don't feel creative in naming it. But so you can save there, and then down under custom, my sweet gradient. So you can load and share if you're working in a team where you need to be sharing the same color palette. These files are individual preset files. They're in RGX format that you can share with your friends, just like Pokemon cards. Yes.
There's a request. Can you maximize the window, because it's a bit too small here on our screen?
Sure.
If it's possible.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
You can also turn off your webcam, Nate. That it's weird, but it maximizes the screen if you turn off the webcam.
Gotcha. You don't need to be looking at me anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Much
man.
better. Thank you.
All right.
We miss your hair though. It's not as fun. The price we'll pay.
You just have to imagine. Okay, so that's essentially it for the color gradient. Were there any other questions on that before we move on to the curves?
I'm curious. Did you? It reminds me the color stops and the gradient overall. It reminds me the one from Maxon from Cinema 4D. Is there some code from Maxon, or did you create it from scratch?
We did create it from scratch, but that is a great question. So we did want to provide kind of a unified design language, amongst the Maxon products, and we did look at how Cinema 4D was handling these UIs and took a lot of inspiration from them and picked and chose. And clearly, Cinema 4D is a much more involved piece of software than what's necessary for Particular. So we kind of pulled the things that we thought would be useful in our application, and I tried to implement them in a way that was also still familiar to Trapcode users. So hopefully we were successful in that.
Yeah, it feels like it.
Oh, good. Yeah, so with that, let's take a look at the curve. So already you can see this is updated, more modern, pleasing look. And we've added quite a bit of functionality to it. So first thing you'll remember either as a previous user or from the graphic I showed earlier, the experience of drawing a curve with the pencil was really clunky and jagged. Right off the bat, just by default, we get a much smoother curve here. And we do actually have 2 interpolation options for the pencil now. So by default, you get the smooth interpolation, but you can still switch over to the linear interpolation. So, if you want to get your little glitter spikes going, you still have that ability as well. And, you can draw with it as well. And then you'll notice the old smooth button is missing. However, if you just switch to pen mode, that just automatically smooths that out for you. So let's see, let's reset that here in pen mode. Right off the bat, you'll notice as soon as you select one of these nodes, we now have Bezier handles. So that's new. Previously, before the update, all we had was this cubic interpolation for pen mode, and that was it. So we now have 3 interpolation modes. Default is Bezier. If you alt-click the handle, you can break the tangent. If you get a little crazy and drag your handle off the edge or something, you just double-click that node and reset it to default. But yeah, so we also, of course, have linear. And when you change the interpolation here, you'll notice it only changes it between the point you have selected and the one to the right of it. In order to change it both, you select the one previous. You can also command click and select multiple points, and you can move points around like that, or you can change all of their interpolations at the same time. Again, up here in the hamburger menu, you can select all points and change interpolation for all of them at the same time if you wish there. And then just like the colors, you'll notice that we have these location values, so you can dial in specific values. This is just the X and Y for each one, and get ultimate control, ultimate precision, and directability. Let's see. So again, we have our copy paste functions up here. And then in the previous design, we had the ability to flip horizontal, and that's cool. We also added the ability to flip vertical for this version, so that essentially inverts your curve, which I have found has been quite useful if you're needing to create variations in things. And that's just a quick way to create a completely different curve that also has a bit of the same language to it. And then again, of course, we added the preset browser functionality. So we have, in the old version, it was just 6 or 7 hard-coded curves, no ability to update them. So we now have all of these new curves, and you can save, load, share, your custom presets as well. So you can load this thing up with all of your favorite curves, share with your friends. So, and that's about it, unless there are any questions.
What about the max and min thing? Can you show them the max and min thing?
Oh yeah, good call, good call. Yes, yeah. So you see these handles right here. These are the min and max handles. So you can quickly adjust your upper and lower limits, and they're even invertible. So that's good. And also, I forgot there is one more feature back in the ECW that is not available in the designer, which is the ability to expand and contract this window. So you can get yourself a little bit more surface area. And that was inspired again by C4D, where you have the ability to pop open your curve in a separate window. And that was on my wish list, but it turns out that was going to be a lot more work than we had time for. So this was the solution, just to give you a little bit more surface area to work with. Anything else?
Sweet, man. I think that's, I wasn't looking at the questions though. Lionel, do we have any questions over there?
Well, just I'm going to relay one of the question, which is a bit out of topic, but it's Drake asking, using form, is there a way to create connection between nodes and points and then animate them? Think of intricate network plexus and so on. I know already the answer, but can let you answer yourself.
Yeah, creating connections between particles, is that the gist of it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there is not currently, but that is a feature request that we have written up. I think Chad and I talked about that. So yeah, I have that on my list of things to look into.
Yeah, that would be very cool.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, seems like you could fake it in some ways, maybe with like a mit from parent or something. But like, yeah, to just kind of have it work like that out of the box, I don't know a way to do that.
I'd have to play with it. I think my money's on Chad figuring it out first.
Oh hush.
All right. Well,
Awesome.
yeah. Do you want to grab the screen back? Should I drop?
Yeah. I could grab that back from you. Badoo. Here we go. Okay. I think we're. Oh wait. There we go. Y'all seeing my screen?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's there.
Okay.
All shining.
Also, yes. Thank you, Nate. I think Nate has to go off to do more Trapcode business and make more Trapcode things as Supreme Lord of Trapcode. But thank you so much for being here and for showing us all the details.
Thank you so much for having me, and everybody, please chime in if you have requests and whatnot, and the team here will pass that along to me. I'm always happy to hear feedback.
Awesome.
Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, awesome
great
updates,
job,
man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care, all.
Bye, Nate.
So everybody, what I was gonna do is what we're gonna look at like practical applications of those curves. So we're gonna be looking at, for those of you that might not be familiar with the color curves, with the curves that the color gradients and the curves that Nate was showing. We're gonna have some practical examples, and then if we have time, we'll get to this little fun Christmassy example with Particular, kind of bring it all together, which is pretty fun. But this is kind of like tangentially related. I was like getting distracted when I was making my examples, and I was like, yay, Christmas party. And now I keep going back to my curves. So yeah, if we have a chance, we'll get into that example. But I find that, people who are experts in Trapcode Particular often have big spots where they're not as familiar. So like when I teach it, like through Maxon, I will train people who are like expert, who have been using Particular for decades, maybe not decades, but like many years, and have tons of experience. And feel like they know every feature, but then there will be like really basic concepts that they miss. And so we're just going to go through the curves and the things that Nate talked about, but in a practical way, and use them in a practical way. And I find that, you know, in particular, we have like form-based behavior, like particles that just stay there. And we also have particles that emit, like these particles here in this standard particular behavior. And it's interesting to note that the curves work differently. So the curves that Nate was showing, like these like size over life or whatever, these graphs, they work differently with particles in form versus particles in particular. And generally speaking, the form graphs adjust things spatially, like they adjust things visually, whereas the curves in particular particles adjust things over time. They adjust things temporally, typically. And so it's easier to actually show this in with form particles than it is to show this in with particular particles. So we're going to start with form, and we're going to do that thing that Nate talked about. So I'm going to crank open the designer. And rather than going in and changing all of the emitter type and emitter behavior and all the blah, 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 I could just go over to my blocks that he mentioned. And if you're not familiar with that, like when I select a block, I'm going to pause this because it gets distracting for my poor ADHD brain. But as I select a block, you know, we get the controls for the block here. But if I mouse over the word blocks, then I get the preset, like preset blocks for that particular type. So if I go to size rotation, and I mouse over the word blocks, then I get size rotation preset blocks. If I go to opacity, I get, you know, opacity blocks that are ready to go. Or I could go to these tabs over here instead of clicking these tabs down here. And if I want to keep this open, then I can click this little arrow to the right, and that pins it open. So then it just kind of stays open, which is nice. And he mentioned this very quickly, but in particular, there are two different types of form, and this can get confusing. There's classic form, and there's also dynamic form. And basically, you use dynamic form when you're wanting to use one of the physics behaviors. So if you're trying to use meander or flocking or fluids, then you want to use dynamic form, which is abbreviated again by this D. But for all standard form things, you just use classic, which is C. So if I just want a standard, you know, form box, I could just click form box, and then I have my classic form box, just classic form. So I love this because it's just, again, a quicker entry point. I could just click on this, and now I'm using form. And it's already set up in a grid by default, just like the default form settings. And so I'm going to take particles in Z down to 1. So just scroll this down. So we just have basically like an XY 2D grid of particles. And then I'm going to go to my emitter size and use XYZ individual so I could make this wider. And then I will, size in Y is like fine-ish. And then I can increase in the distribution section, increase my particles along the X-axis and particles along the Y-axis. So I have this nice sheet of particles. And now I could fiddle with these the gradients a little bit more. And since Nate spent a lot of time in the designer, I'm going to go back to, I'm going to hit apply and go back to the what he called the ECW, which is Maxon speak for effect control window. I think that's what that stands for. And so that's what this is. So we have the two different ways to control things, the effect controls panel and the designer. So now I'm using these form particles. And so like I said, the graphs will apply to things spatially. So if I go over to like my particles here, and I go to size over, and let's say size over X. Now again, with particular particles, this affects the size over life. So this is, the left side represents the size at birth, and the right side represents the size at the end of their life. And so again, birth to death. But again, form particles don't die. So there is no time for form particles. They're just always there. So what this controls is the size over this axis. So from left to right. So if I want the particles to be bigger, maybe I'll increase this up to like 10 just for right now. So I have these bigger particles, take down sphere feather because that's just kind of gross right now. maybe a little bit smaller, like 8, so we can still see them. There we go. So if I want the particles to be big here and then to get smaller over on the right, then I could just take one of these points and move this down. And when this updates, you see that that's smaller over on this side. And maybe I'll grab this point and bring it down. So then we have an area right about here where these particles get smaller. So you see that I can actually, yeah, if I take this down to 0, then there's just 0 size. There's almost like a gap in between these two chunks. So you can see that I have a lot of flexibility for sculpting particles, sculpting the look of particles by playing around with these points. And by adding things like the Bezier handles and things like that, you know, we're able to really craft the look of our particles and what they're doing in a very specific way. We don't have to use maps. We don't have to use other layers. We have a lot of control once we start mastering these controls here. And again, I could go to this hamburger menu. If I flip horizontal, which again, he talked about, which has been the behavior for a long time, then we just flip this on that axis. But the cool thing is that now we can flip vertical, like he mentioned, so it just inverts that. So if we want to have some particles be, you know, red in this section and the other particles be blue or whatever, we can, you know, have one system of particles that does this and then copy it and then invert it so that we have access to those other colors. So you can create these really interesting patterns and shapes and things like that inside of your particles with curves, which is pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and reset this. And I'll just go ahead and actually click presets, because one of the things that's really awesome that Nate kind of just like alluded to, but these presets, you know, we've had block presets for a while, but they didn't exist here in the ECW, as we call it, the Effect Controls panel. You couldn't, in the regular After Effects interface, have access to any of those presets other than like the kind of like simple ones that were built into the interface. But now we have access to much more, even custom ones from here, from the Effect Controls panel too, without having to open up the designer if we just want to go really quickly. So I can go to a linear slope and click OK. And then now my size kind of drifts over time. And maybe I'll want to double click and add a point there. So this is a little bit more full, a little bit more smooth. There we go. And again, I could go over to the pen tool, or I could, yeah, and then switch over and then get kind of more of like a smooth thing, or I can select a point and delete it. So I have some smoothness there. So basically I just want a nice smooth gradient across here. And I have like these Bezier handles I'll need to fix, but yeah, let's change this over. Okay. Now, let's play with the color of this. If I go to set color, I'm going to go to, let's say over X. I'll set the color, no, over Y. Let's say over Y. I want the colors to go up and down. And so now we have the color gradient. And I realize we just saw this, but I want to show you like a little bit more of what this can look like. So right now these colors are blending, and maybe I don't want it to do that. So I could go over to, let's say presets, and I'll go to, let's say fuchsia maybe. And I click that. And now what I can do, actually, let me get something that has a little bit more detail to it. I'll just do Chinatown. And then what I can do here is go here and say step all. And so now I have just these like chunks of color. And maybe I'll click this one and just like drag it off. And maybe I'll go back and redistribute these. And so now you can see much more clearly what we can do with these color presets. We see these divided lines. And so we don't have particles that are kind of like in between. Each one is like a solid color, which is really awesome. Another thing to keep in mind is how much control you have over these particles. Like for example, if we want to displace this, we can go into the displace area, go into turbulence field. Okay, thank you for letting me know that. And I could go into displace strength, let's say. So this is just like form, where we're taking this invisible field, this invisible fractal field, and we are blending this together. And we could go into the blend mode over here and change this to add. So then we get to this add behavior that's really cool. But let's say I want this to be like straight, like a flag, where this is flat on the left and then kind of goes into disarray and chaos on the right. I can do that with the curves. So I could do fractal strength over X, and then I could go into my fractal strength curve, and maybe I want to use the same curve that I created before. And I could go into my size curve, and I can go to the hamburger menu, choose copy, and then go down to this one, hamburger menu, and paste. So then I get the same thing, but actually the way that this works is the strength of the fractal displacement on the curve is at 100%, and then it fades off into nothing, and I want it to be the opposite. So again, over here, flip horizontal, and then now we have this. We're flat on the left, and then we get crazy. But I might want to, again, bring this over, or maybe I'll double click another point here, flatten this so we have no fractal displacement. And you can see, anyways, we can keep going with this, but you get the gist. So now as I preview this back, we have fractal displacement that's just on the right side of our graph, as we've seen here, which is pretty cool. Now, you'll notice that as I go to frame 0, that there's nothing. There's no displacement here. As I preview this, it kind of like fades in. So it's not there, and then it kind of just like, yeah, there's like just a little bit, just like a half second of fading in the fractal displacement. And that's controlled by this value over here, which is fade in time. You see it's 0.5, it's about a half second. So if I took this to 0, so there's no fade in time, then when this starts, it just starts right there at frame 0. If we want to start later, we can take this to like 3 seconds, and then for 3 seconds, there's nothing. It just kind of gradually fades in over 3 seconds. So we have a lot of control with the turbulence field, and especially when combining it with the curve there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to temporal curves in particular. We have a few little tiny like baby examples, and here's kind of like the same type thing we were just looking at about fading in over time. I'm going to skip over that one for now. And talk about color over life. So, you know, like I just mentioned, you know, the curves and the color gradients, they affect the particles differently and form particles versus particular particles. So here we have like a little like candle flame, like kind of candle flame, just pretend it's a candle flame. It's not perfect, but these particles kind of like go up and then drift up, but it doesn't look like a candle flame because of the color. So if I go over to my color and I set this, let's say over Y, we're changing the colors of these particular particles over time. So now I could go into, let's see here, where's my color gradient here? Over life, there we go. And change this to over life. So then I go to my color gradient, and then maybe what I can do is just like, you know, select these color stops that are not fiery. And then maybe I'll add like a white at the top here and make that just kind of like a pale yellow. Distribute this a little bit more. And so now each particle is going to be this red color when it's born, and it's gradually going to, you know, fade. By the end of its life, it's going to be white. So now we have these particles that's kind of like so. And of course, again, like Nate mentioned, we can tweak this so that they're not red for so long. So maybe we want them to go to yellow quicker. And so then we have this. So it's not really, we're not really controlling the particles over Y, like I initially was gonna choose here, like we would in form, but each particle is going to go through this lifespan over its life. It's gonna go through this color gradient over life. So if we went to the emitter, for example, and we increased direction spread so they went all over the place, and maybe even like that, so they were like that, we could see a little bit more clearly that they start out red, and then over time, they gradually shift to a different color. Here's an opacity over life example. And opacity over life, again, we've kind of talked about opacity over life. I showed this initially, but one of the cool things that we can do here, let's go into systems here. I'll turn off the system. So actually system 1, if I go to my primary system, I actually made these invisible particles, and I'll increase the opacity so we can see what's going on. So I just had like a little like burst of particles. Those particles are just kind of like exploding out. Then I created a second system that would emit from the parent system, and then they have this gradient. But I didn't want these kind of like little like tips at the end of them. So I just turned off the opacity of the primary system, and they're just used to control the children, if you are. They're just used as controllers to make these like auxiliary type particles emit from them. But we can go into opacity over life into our grid here, and we can change basically what these particles look like by sculpting this over time. So we can make these like really interesting like streaks, because as we cut this down here, you could see that we get this, you know, really interesting shape to our particles by kind of adjusting the opacity over life. Because they're in a straight line, it kind of creates these like little streaks. So you can create really complex effects. So it looks like we have multiple, you know, things emitting out, multiple streaks emitting out. I'll just scoot these little things over so it's like happens at a different space. There we go. And then, yeah, so it's like we have like a more complex eruption of particles where it's like, well, hey, how did you get these little like streaks and then separate streaks? And it's very easily done with a little bit of curves, which is pretty cool. I took a little bit more time and did a particle explosion and like a little like pop of particles, which is pretty cool. And using curves makes this pretty easy. We can just explode the particles. And I think I'm just going to skip over this right now because we've done a lot of this kind of stuff. And I want to get to the text example. So if we have time, we'll go back to that. But I want to get to this text sparkly project example. So let's just start from the beginning. I've created a text already, so it's just kind of, we don't have to worry about that. And I put a layer with particular on it. So then how do we get these to line up? So this particular emits from this text. Well, it's pretty easy. We have a couple steps that we have to go through, but basically no big deal. So what I need to do in particular, I only have just like the one system. This is just kind of like a, you know, a default application of particular. Nothing's been changed. I changed the emitter type to text mask. Then that opens up this text mask emitter section. So I could open this up and I need to choose the layer. Now, once I change the layer, Christmas party, it's not done. I still have more to do because I'll choose Christmas party and it'll say text mask emitter must be a 3D layer. To fix this, switch the layer to 3D. So I need to go back to my 3D layer or my text layer, change it to a 3D layer by clicking the little cube icon, and then everything changed when I did that. So now we are actually emitting from our text, which is really cool. And to see this a little bit more clearly, I'm actually going to take off the visibility of my text layer, and then, you know, our text is just kind of emitting the particles. This is kind of hard to see initially. So I don't, you know, when I'm using a 3D object or text or a mask as an emitter, oftentimes what I'll do is I'll take velocity down to 0, at least, especially in like when I'm first working on it, when I'm first trying to make sure that it works. I take down the velocity just so I can see what's going on. So now it's like a little bit more clear what's happening. Also might want to take down the velocity random. I also might want to increase the particles per second. And so now I could again see that this is actually working and I am free to frolic and play with this a little bit. And speaking of frolicking and playing, before I get into that, are there any questions in the chat? I'm kind of just like excited about this and kind of going off my own merry way, but merry, I get it because it's Christmas. But is there any questions from the chat or comments or things?
Yeah, Ben is asking if there's a Trapcode forum for Maxon or
Is
at
my
Maxon.
internet broken and no one's hearing any of this?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Maybe my internet's broken and no one's hearing any of this. Okay, well.
Mic check.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, you know what might be happening?
We can hear
let me just double
everybody
check
can hear
really
each other.
quick because I'm not hearing anything from anyone, but it might be that my sound is not working.
Yeah, anyway, we can hear Chad, but you can't hear us.
should be
Fun times.
working. Okay.
So we can say
So I'm not
bad
hearing
things about
anything,
you.
so I'm just gonna keep going. Hopefully
That happens.
y'all can hear me. Okay, so I have my Christmas party text, but I actually want to adjust this a bit. So in my text mask emitter section, it's emitting from the faces. So that's basically just, I mean, I guess there aren't faces technically, maybe, because it's not actual geometry. So I can change this from faces to edges and then emit from the edges. And that creates this kind of outliney effect. And what's kind of fun is that as the particles die, as they hit the end of their life, then it kind of creates this like cool sparkle thing, which is really fun. Another thing that we could do is we could adjust the path end, which is what I ended up doing. So we could basically take this down to 0, and then the path doesn't, that's not on there. If I take this to the beginning, and then if we, actually, let me just go ahead and take this off. There we go. So then as I take the path end down to 0, there we go. So it's nothing, and then we could animate it on, so it's kind of like drawing on if we wanted to do that. It's kind of a cool effect. And then also I could turn my text on and then go to the color. Maybe I'll add like this Christmassy holiday red, and then the text kind of grows, or the particles kind of grow on to the text there. And there we have that. Now, another thing that I did is I made these particles HDR particles, which I love doing. So I went into the particle section, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the color gradient here, or not the color gradient, the color swatch. And I'm going to make this an HDR color, making sure that my project is in 32 bits per channel mode. I'm going to give it 3 in the red and 2 in the green. So 3, 2, 1 is the color. And it looks white here, but then here it's kind of like got this like orangey tint in the hue section. So I'll click OK, and that's what I want. And maybe then I'll take down the size to like 3, and then maybe size random, increase the size randomness, and there we have it. So we're starting to see the beginnings of what is Christmas party text, which is really fun. So then what I wanted to do in order to get these particles spilling out is that I want to emit from these parent particles. So I want those particles to keep doing what they're doing, just keep wrapping around the Christmas text and then dying out slowly. But I also want to add more particles kind of shooting down, raining down from this. So I'm going to open up my show systems, and I'm going to click on add a system. This is going to open up the designer and give us a second system. And I could go over here to my emitter type, and I want this to be, I'm actually going to take this down to like 3 particles per second, because when you do emit from parent, it creates a lot of particles. So I'm going to do emitter type, emit from parent system. See that? Wow, look at all those particles. And emit probability controls what's the probability that a parent particle emits particles. So I'm going to take this down to 3. And then now as we play this back, then once those particles kind of come on screen, then they start emitting particles. And I also want to go into motion, take the velocity down to 0. And so now those particles will just kind of like hang there. But what I can do here is I can go to this area. Let's see, what are we doing here? We want to give this some environment. So I'm gonna click on this plus icon right here. I'm going to add an environment block, and I'll just say I'll use the environment down, or the gravity down block, which adds gravity. So I could go manually and increase the gravity, but that works for me to add that block. And now as I preview this, we have these blocks that are falling, and we have this like cascading, nice little effect there, which is pretty cool. So I'll click apply. And there is this bug in this current version of Particular that gets rid of HDR colors. It levels them off when you go into the designer. So a quick fix for that, I'll go to the designer, go back to the designer really quick, is I'll go to the color block on the second system and then hit the trash can. That deletes it, which tells system 2 to get its color from the system 1. And I'm going to click apply. So then I could go back to the primary system, go to particle, and I can go to my color and back to 3, 2, 1, and that gets our color back. So now we have this type of thing, which is pretty cool. Now, another thing that I could do here, it's starting to look very uniform. You know, these particles falling. I do like it being uniform, but maybe not quite that much. So I might want to add like a little bit of velocity, like maybe like 5. You see that really like makes a difference already. Maybe increase the velocity random, and I think that helps. Another thing that I want to do is that I want to adjust the life random, because as I start playing with these particles and making them behave in different ways, as I add these kind of like these curves and things like that, it's over life. And so then as I add the life random, you get a lot more variation because things are changing, because their behavior is changing over life. And so then as you randomize the life span, how long they live, then you get a bunch of random effects from these particles, which is really cool. And one of my favorite blocks here, if I go over to opacity over life and I go to the presets, one of the things that when I was talking to Nate, like one of the things that I insisted on is that there would still be this behavior where, like he mentioned with the pencil, that you can draw on these little spikes, because this little flicker slope 1, for example, this preset is really fun when it comes to making sparkles, because what happens is that they're fully opaque particles, and then gradually they die out over time. But then there's these little spikes here. And what that does is it makes the particles like fade out, but then as they're fading out, they occasionally go back to 100% opacity, which makes them kind of twinkle a little bit. So as I choose that here, I think I might be on the wrong system here. Yeah, so these particles are twinkling because I'm on the wrong system. I need to go to system 2. That's really where I want those to be. So I'm going to go opacity over life and go back and choose that flicker slope 1 preset for these falling particles. And then also, I think I want them to be size random as well. I think that will make a difference. There we go. And maybe make them a little bit smaller, make it 2. There we go. So now these particles are going to be random sizes. They're going to fall, and then they're going to do that sparkle thing. So like right as they like die out, they start sparkling. Oops, I didn't do that. I didn't apply this thing. Here we go. Flicker slope. Okay. That's not it's not taking. That's really interesting. Well, maybe what I'll do is do this. I'll go back to this one, copy, go to the second one, and go to opacity over life, and paste this. There we go. So now, as these particles are falling, there's the sparkle. So they're dead by this point. They seem like they are. They faded out, but then they kind of come back as little sparkles. Yay. It's so cool. Okay. Now, another thing that made this kind of fun is that I added a little bit of physics with bouncing. So I'm going to go to a comp that where everything's kind of like working already. I also added another system. These are like stars, the star particles. So there's actually stars and spheres, and they're kind of falling. But I want them to bounce. And so I've created this floor, which is basically just a regular solid layer. And I made it 3D and rotated it so it's like flat. So I don't think we're seeing it. There's lights on it. You can kind of see these little gradients, which are actually like lights on it, but the particles aren't interacting with it in any way. So what I can do is go to my particular sparkle, and I'll go to, let's go to my spheres, the little dots that are falling here. And I'm going to go to the physics simulations, and I'm going to, enable bounce. And on bounce 1, I'm going to choose the floor as my bounce layer, and I'm going to make sure that that's 3D, or else that won't work. And I don't think I need to do anything else really, because it's in the right spot. It's rotated in the right spot. So now these particles get here, wait for it, they start bouncing. See that? They have a little bounce to them. And maybe I'll add bounce strength like higher, like 150, so you can really see what's going on there. And then they start bouncing. And maybe not as clear because we were seeing the stars. Maybe I go turn off those stars temporarily, and then we could see particles fall, and then they bounce up. Maybe that's a little hardcore there. Maybe go to like 80. So then they go, and then they're bouncing there. And it kind of creates this awesome, I don't know, this like sediment area where they kind of just like build up right there, and I don't know, it feels kind of like organic and natural and adds more to the spark and whatnot. And another thing I did is I created an adjustment layer, and I added the tool reflection from the VFX suite to this. And reflection creates reflections of whatever's there. And by putting it on an adjustment layer, it takes all the layers that are in your scene and it reflects those. So then I could go to the axis start and move that up until it's like basically touching there. Same thing on the other side. There we go. I can keep fiddling with this until we have like a good sense that this is the floor here. And then now, as we preview this, these particles kind of have a nice like reflection floor. Now, another thing that I could do here is I could, this gizmo is controlling it here, this yellow thing. So I can take down the slant and height to kind of make it seem like this is kind of like the floor is angled in the same way that our actual floor, the solid layer is. See that? There we go. And maybe this is a little bit too bright, so I could take the opacity down a little bit. I could also increase the softness to kind of give that a little bit of a blur. Little dab will do you here though, so just a little bit. Another thing that I did is I added a fractal noise map, and I used that as a displacement map to kind of create a little bit more glisten and shine in the reflection. And I'll show you that in just a second. I could also increase the fade length. Actually, I'm gonna decrease fade length, and that will make this edge part eventually start to fade a little bit. So there's that, which is nice. And again, in the final, I used this reflection map. And actually, I'm just gonna copy this layer and put it back in our other layer because we already were using it here. There we go. Just gonna paste that layer there. And if you look here, this is like the fractal noise map. Just looks like that, just kind of standard fractal noise. But I could go to the displacement map and choose that fractal noise reflection map, make sure to change this to effects and masks. And then as I adjust the horizontal and vertical displacement, then it's going to displace this text, making it look like it's kind of like watery or shimmery, or maybe that's just like a not completely smooth surface or whatever. I could also adjust the horizontal displacement, but I really didn't want to do that in this case. So now we have these particles that fall and we see the reflection. And maybe that was a little hardcore with that opacity. Maybe I'll bring that back up again and maybe increase the fade length a little bit. But you see what we're going for here. Another thing that I did is I added Starglow, which I think, you know, adds a lot to this. I tried optical glow, which is my go-to glow effect, but I wasn't happy with what I was getting. And then I tried Starglow, which usually is kind of like overkill for me because it's like super intense and like 80s. If I'm creating like an 80s thing, then that's great, but usually it's a little overkill. But what I did is I took this down a lot. So the streak length was very tiny. And then I could also play with the pre-process threshold so that not everything is getting glow applied to it. Actually, I want to go the opposite direction. So increase this, increase this, increase this. So only the brightest sparkles get Starglow applied to them. And then I could also go into Shimmer and increase the amount there of Shimmer, which will make these kind of, these little glows kind of sparkle a little bit. So then we have this fun little result for our Christmas party. And in the final, this is basically what I came up with. I kind of liked having the red on there. And what's kind of a little extra benefit, which actually might be a curse, but because I had to make the text three-dimensional in order for Particular to use it as an emitter, then when I had the lights in my scene that light the floor, they also light my text, which creates a little bit of, some kind of gradient, adds a little bit of dimension. And then we kind of have this final result, which is really fun. So there you have it. Fun little Christmas thing. Oh, another thing I should mention is that this is procedural because it's dealing with text. All of this stuff is coming from the text. So I could say like, actually, I'm going to recycle this for my New Year's party or my whatever kind of party that I want to throw. And then instantly, all that stuff, all the particles, everything, reflection, everything changes and updates automatically as well, which is really cool. I could go in and change like the kerning, which would probably bother me if I sat with this a little bit longer, and fiddle with that, and then it's going to update everything, the particles, reflection, everything else, because it's all live, which is really, really helpful and allows you to recycle it for next year, which is good for the environment somehow. Anyways, that's all I have. Are there any questions? I don't know if I'll be able to hear them, but
Can you hear us?
Can you hear us?
Or maybe like
Chad.
I'm alone. Maybe everyone's left, and
Chad is all alone.
no one's here anymore. I'm gonna turn back on my webcam just so you know that I exist. And oh, hey Dustin, what's up?
Hi, Chad.
So am I my headphones just not working? You guys are talking and
Yeah, it
okay.
works.
Okay. Well, this is what this
Oh,
is.
man.
I do have I got these like AirPod Max 5000 things, like they're all newfangled, and one would expect that they would work, but they often don't work. They'll just kind of like cut out. I mean, they were working when I was talking to Nate earlier. We saw that. We have documented, it's on the recording. But then they just choose to not work sometimes. They'll just like go out.
Yeah,
I'm assuming
you
that
went
everyone
with
can
the
hear you
6000s.
guys. So would you like to talk about Pyro, what's coming up next week?
Yes, we can. So yeah, next week we're going to show Pyro with a lot of examples and so on. So I'll start with Dustin showing some stuff, and then for the whole month we'll be showing other stuff. So I think it'll be very interesting because I know everyone is excited with Pyro. It's very fun to burn everything, to play with fire and so on. We all know that.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited. I know Chad can't hear us, but I'm excited.
My audio just came back, guys. It's working
Hey!
again.
All right. Hooray.
So before we
Sorry,
hop
go
off, Chad, we do have a question about a forum for Trapcode. And yes, Jim, just for the record, I am trying to hold it together. This is absolutely hilarious today.
Yeah. That's I need a therapist to be like to process how I just ignored everyone for like 45 minutes. But yes, but we're here now. We're talking. The lines of dialogue are open. Yeah, I don't know that there is a forum, but that's like a really great request to have a Trapcode forum so that we can, share and talk. And I think that we're working on some things, but yeah, but I will take that feedback back to the team and see if we can't get that going. I think that would be a really great thing because with Trapcode stuff, a lot of the tools like Mirror is the same way, DAO is the same way, where like you can do so many things with them, and they're just kind of like really basic, like Legos, like basic building blocks, and then you could just do infinite things with them. And so being able to have like more connection to the community where we can kind of like share our tips and tricks and things like that, so we're not kind of all operating our own bubbles and all kind of like solving the same problem simultaneously independently. We could kind of like work together on those. I think that's a really great idea.
Definitely.
Are there any other like questions or anything in the chat, the comments about something since
someone was asking about making the particles stick to the ground. I think you can do it. It's an option. You have bounce and stick. Is it still there?
Correct. Yes. So with these spheres, for example, I could go into my physics simulations and into the balance. I don't know why it opens up like every single menu that ever was when I go to select something. But if I go into this, the collision event, by default, the collision event is bounce. But I could also have the I could also have the particles slide. So like they hit it and then they kind of like slide if we want to do that. We could also have them kill, which like they just die as soon as they hit it, which is also pretty cool because then you could have other systems react when those particles kill. So when the parent particles die, something happens. So this is good for like water splashes. So particles can kill when they hit a surface, and then you have children particles that are born and create like froth and splash and stuff like that. But then, of course, yes, you could have the particles stick to the surface as well. And then this option slide friction comes into play as well when you're getting into these other options like slide and stick, because it's how much the particles like stick to the surface and how much do they want to like not slide or whatever. We could adjust that with the slide friction. So yeah, absolutely, we can have them stick. So great question.
Awesome.
All right, anything else?
I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's it. I was just scrolling back up and through them.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Well, happy holidays, everyone. I will be off of the demystifying for the rest of the year, so I just wore my Christmas sweater a little prematurely for some people. You could deal with it, but Merry holidays to everyone. And yeah, and guys, thanks so much for an amazing month of tips and tricks and everything else. It's been great. I've learned a lot from you, and I'll miss hanging out. And best of luck with the Pyro next week. I'll be watching as a fan from the stands. So, and thank you all, everyone, for being here, for your comments and questions, and for contributing to our community. We love you. And all right, have a good one. We'll see you next time.
That sounds good. Thanks a lot, everyone. We'll see you next week.
See you, everybody.